There is no strength in swordplay based on force. That is the first line that Hawkeye Mihawk gives to Zoro when they first meet, right after Zoro notes that Hawkeye Mihawk has some of the most graceful swordsmanship that he has ever seen. And this opening line not only informs the journey that Zoro will go on over the next 1,000 episodes, but I believe also informs the way in which Hawkeye Mihawk and Zoro's arcs will conclude in their final clash at the end of the story. Now I will say this, over the last few hundred episodes or few hundred chapters, One Piece has definitely taken a turn towards the more flashy. The fights have gotten bigger and more powerful, the attacks are more potent, the power scaling is off the charts insane, and just for all intents and purposes, One Piece is an entirely different story now than it was during the Baratie arc when Zoro and Mihawk first meet. And I'm really not the biggest fan of this direction that One Piece has taken. Granted, it is fun and it does have its moments, but generally speaking, I enjoy it much more when stories keep their power scaling relatively realistic, that way the viewer can have a more personal understanding of what is happening in front of them. Not to say that One Piece is bad or that I just don't enjoy the fights, but personally I prefer the way in which the characters conducted their conflicts pre-time skip versus the way they do it in post-time skip. Now, this power scaling and the way in which that attacks have evolved over the course of One Piece has made people draw the conclusion that Zoro's eventual clash with Hawkeye Mihawk will be the biggest, most explosive thing that we have ever seen in manga. That they are going to be slicing islands in half, and their swords are going to be clashing and making these crazy sounds, and all these crazy lights are going to be flying everywhere in the anime, and it's just going to be one massive ball of power when these two legendary swordsmen clash. And while this is definitely a very real possibility, it's not the outcome that I would like for these two characters, and I'm really hoping this isn't the direction that Oda takes them. There is a lot to unpack about Zoro and Mihawk's first encounter in the Baratie arc, but more than anything, Hawkeye Mihawk gives Zoro a humbling and shows him that his way of swordsmanship will not last much longer, that he needs to change and evolve in order to live in this new world. Up until this point in time, Zoro hasn't really been matched in swordsmanship since Koina, and he's just brute forced his way through all of his enemies and through his training. We see this in his flashback arc, where we see him constantly working out and constantly brute forcing his way through training and through his opponents. But this is not something that can work with Hawkeye Mihawk, because to be a great swordsman requires more than just raw strength and power. It requires grace, it requires attention to detail, it requires refining yourself over and over and over again, and this is the lesson that Zoro learns. So throughout the remainder of One Piece, he is not only getting physically stronger, but refining his craft as a swordsman. That is why in the Arabasta arc, he's able to slice through things using an early form of haki that he was never able to do before, even though he's not outputting as much force as he usually would. His grace and his true skill as a swordsman is growing. So with all that being said, Hawkeye vs. Zoro in the Baratie arc is less a test of one's strength and more a test of one's grace and raw ability with a sword. So when they eventually have their final clash, I really hope it isn't just a lot of clashing lights and islands being split apart. I hope it's far more graceful and refined. And the best example that I can use to explain what kind of fight I want to see between Zoro and Mihawk is Kakashi vs. Obito towards the end of Naruto Shippuden. Kakashi vs. Obito is a fight that is very much built up, and at this point in Naruto, the power scaling is out of this world. Every attack is massive, there's flashing lights everywhere, continents are being ripped apart, and the power scaling is insane at this point. But when Kakashi and Obito have their final fight, It's very small scale and very refined. The world isn't blowing up while they clash. It is just raw, hand-to-hand combat that lasts a very short amount of time in a space where it's just the two of them, where there really isn't much going on other than the fight. It's just a very beautiful and well-crafted moment of two characters resolving their differences with hand-to-hand combat. And this is the exact way I want Zoro's fight with Mihawk to eventually conclude. A lot of people really want to see a massive fight that spans a bunch of episodes who can get the most out of it. But for me personally, even though that's what we get from One Piece, that's not what I want to see. I would really appreciate it if Oda showed some restraint with Hawkeye and Zoro's final confrontation, keeping it within 1 to 2 episodes and having it be just them and swordplay. No flashy lights, no continents getting destroyed, no crazy otherworldly abilities and attacks, just straight swordplay. That's it. And I would honestly take this a step further. I would love if Hawkeye and Zoro, for their final confrontation, fought with the bamboo sticks. Now, I know that might sound kind of crazy, and if you disagree, that's perfectly fine, but one of the things that I really took away from Zoro and Kuina's relationship is they have this final fight with real swords, and in this moment, they learn to understand that it isn't the sword that makes the fighter. It's the skill, it's the beauty, it's the art, and all of this can be accomplished with regular bamboo swords. I think this could also be a great way to mitigate the destruction that their fight would cause if they were to use their black blades. This goes hand in hand because if they use the bamboo sticks, they might not be able to use some of these powers, and they can just use their raw, beautiful, gentle swordsmanship skills. And this could create a really beautiful moment where there is nothing to take you away from the beautiful fight that is happening in front of your eyes. And I believe this fight could end with Zoro bopping Mihawk across the face, much like Kuina used to do to him. That way, Zoro's arc with Kuina could be completed. He becomes the world's strongest swordsman without having to kill his mentor, Hawkeye Mihawk. I would also appreciate it if there's little to no music during this match. But with that being said, they probably won't use the bamboo swords, so if they do end up using their real swords, I hope the way in which it ends is with Zoro beating Mihawk much in the same way that Kuina beats him on that fateful night 15 years prior. With Zoro knocking Hawkeye Mihawk down, disarming him, but then placing his sword roughly 2 inches to the right of Mihawk's neck, not actually killing him or harming his mentor that he very much respects, but undoubtedly winning and solidifying Zoro's arc as one of the best ones in all of One Piece. Now, I know that's kind of a lot to come to terms with or think about, but I genuinely believe that Zoro's arc and his fight with Hawkeye Mihawk will be far better in terms of storytelling if their fight isn't unbelievably flashy and doesn't last forever. But then again, this is my first One Piece theory video, so please let me know in the comments down below what you think about this theory, and if you want to see some more One Piece content from me. I'm currently doing my first rewatch of the series, and I'm really enjoying it, and I love talking about it. So with all that being said, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Peace.